This story happened when I was in high school. My friends and I loved going to a movie theater in our town's shopping mall. Usually, we went in big groups, but this time it was just my friend Avery and me. We chose a late showing of a strange movie, but I can't remember its name. The movie theater stayed open very late at night for some reason. I'm not sure why, because after around 11 o'clock, not many people came. Except for us, of course, as we always chose the latest showings. When we arrived, as I expected, there was nobody else in the theater. We found 2 seats in one of the front rows and started watching the movie after the previews. There's something I forgot to mention. Before we entered the theater, I bought a big soda from the fountain, but turned out to be a bad idea. Not even a quarter of the way through the movie, I really needed to use the bathroom. I told Avery and got up to go, then reached the bathroom. These bathrooms didn't have automatic lights, so you had to switch the lights on and off manually. The lights were off, so I was surprised to see someone inside when I walked in. It was a man, and I couldn't tell how old he was. He was standing near the sinks in what was just complete darkness a moment ago. We made short eye contact for a second before I went to do my business. I got done and went to go wash my hands. The guy was still standing there in the same position, but I ignored and started walking out. Then he followed me inside and watched me sit down next to Avery. He stood there for a few minutes before walking to our same row and sitting down, literally 1 seat away from us, as if there was only 1 seat that separated me and this guy. Again, this was a theater that was completely empty. He could have chosen anywhere else to sit. During one of the louder scenes of the movie, Avery asked me in a whisper if I knew the guy. I told her about the bathrooms and she agreed. It was weird, especially considering the guy wasn't even here to watch the first part of the movie. But we both decided to just stick it out for the rest of it. As the movie continued, things got a little weirder. The guy kept looking over at us every few minutes, like even just from the corner of my eye. I could clearly tell he was doing it. He didn't make any effort to hide himself. Finally, the movie ended and the credits started rolling. Avery and I immediately stood up and began walking toward the exit. But, as we should have expected by then, the guy started walking fast to keep up with us. When we reached the hallways, they were completely empty. I didn't see any employees around, so we hurriedly walked out the door and headed towards our car in the parking lot. As we were backing up, we noticed a man getting into a blue Dodge Charger. I quickly drove out of the parking lot and towards the nearest main street. I asked Avery to keep an eye out to see if he was following us, but as far as we could see, he had disappeared. There was nobody else on the road except us. We felt relieved and started discussing how scary the situation was. It was clear that the guy had been following us, and it was obvious he wasn't there to watch the movie. I mean, he missed most of it. Suddenly, our conversation was interrupted by a car with its bright headlights pulling up behind us at a red light. Both of us turned to look, hoping it wasn't the same blue Dodge Charger, but it was hard to tell because the headlights were blinding. Then, the driver's side door swung open, and a man ran towards our car at full speed. It was the same guy from before. He aggressively tried to open our car's doors and then pulled out a knife, stabbing at one of the windows. I quickly pressed on the gas pedal, running the red light before he could get inside the car. I made a right turn onto the next street and started taking random turns to confuse the guy. Luckily, it worked. We parked on the side of the road with the car lights off, both of us catching our breath. We waited for a long time before deciding to continue towards our homes, taking side streets the whole way. We both told our parents about what happened, and they decided to report it to the police. The police investigated the incident and reached out to the movie theater's manager. Surprisingly, the theater had security cameras, which I didn't know about. However, the man was not captured on any of the cameras throughout that night. The cameras were mostly near the main entrance of the building, so it's possible that he entered through a fire exit or some other way that wasn't the main entrance. Because of this, his identity remains unknown. But we were grateful to have escaped safely that night, but the incident left us with lingering unease and a heightened sense of caution. When I was about 9 years old, my grandpa used to take me to the movie theater every Thursday during the summer. We would go in the morning or early afternoon, so there weren't many people there. One time, something really special happened when we had the whole theater just for ourselves. We chose 2 seats in one of the back rows because we thought they were the best seats in the whole theater. I can't quite remember which movie we watched because it was a long time ago. As we kept watching, no one else came in. But usually, a few latecomers join the movie after it has already started, but that didn't happen on this day. We really had the whole theater just for us. When we were about halfway through the movie, my grandpa needed to use the bathroom. He didn't want to disturb me, so he let me stay alone while he went. About 30 seconds after he left, I noticed someone entering the theater from the corner of my eye. I turned my head to see who it was because I didn't expect my grandpa to come back so quickly. It was a man, probably in his early 30s, wearing one of those striped uniforms that employees wear. We looked at each other for a few seconds. Then he walked towards the emergency exit and opened it with something, allowing sunlight to stream into the room. After that, he walked back towards the main exit of the theater and left. I remember not thinking much about it at the time as it didn't bother me at all. I was focused on the movie when suddenly, the light from the door became brighter. I turned to look and saw that the door was wide open. Another man had opened it from outside. He held a dim flashlight and started scanning the theater. Eventually, the light landed on me. He turned off the flashlight and gestured for me to come to him using his finger. Now, remember, I was about 9 years old at that time. But before that, no one had really talked to me about not trusting strangers, and also you have to know that things were different back then. Strangers weren't seen as much of a concern as they are today. So, I got up from my seat and started walking towards the exit door. The man said his name was Joseph and he seemed really friendly, or at least that's how he wanted to appear. He told me that he had just finished watching a movie in another theater and had some leftover candy he didn't eat. He thought he could offer it to me, instead of throwing it away. After hearing that, my eyes filled with excitement, and I told him I was interested. Then he told me that all the candy was in his car trunk. He held my hand tightly and started leading me towards the only car in the isolated parking lot behind the building. As we approached, he took out a set of keys from his pocket and used them to open the trunk of the car. The trunk lid opened, revealing a variety of different candy bars. He told me to crawl inside and choose whichever ones I wanted. But just as I was about to crawl in, the exit door of the building suddenly burst open, and my grandpa started yelling angrily at the guy. It completely surprised me. Until that moment, I had never heard my grandpa raise his voice before. I instinctively moved away from the car trunk when he started yelling. The guy quickly ran to the driver's side, jumped in, and drove off with the trunk still open, all within seconds. I started crying, not fully understanding what had almost happened. My grandpa, in a soothing voice, tried to calm me down. Looking back now, I can only imagine the worry and stress he must have felt when he returned from the bathroom and realized I was no longer there. He later told me that he found out where I had gone because the guy had left the exit door slightly open after luring me outside. After the incident, my grandpa called the police. However, the car I almost got lured into had no license plates, and it was a very common car that could be seen on the road. So, despite providing a description, the car was never found. My grandpa also described the man who tried to lure me, but he was never located either. The person who had pretended to be an employee and opened the door was later discovered to have never worked there. They remained unidentified as well. Thankfully, this was an isolated incident. No other children in the building that day or afterward were targeted, as far as we were informed. I think they might have installed an alarm system for the emergency exits after that incident, but I'm not entirely sure because we never returned to that movie theater again. When I was 16 years old, I got my first job at a local movie theater in my town. They really needed people who could work late shifts, which I actually preferred. So it worked out perfectly for me. The theater wasn't very big, so it was possible to handle the closing shift alone on some days, depending on the day of the week. But usually, I would be scheduled to work with one or two other people. It was a Tuesday night, and the last movies were finishing up. Another kid named Noah, who was around my age, was working with me. We were the only two working that night, and our job was to get everything ready for the next morning when the theater would open again. As time passed, we reached a point where all the movies had ended a while ago. It was my responsibility to check each theater and make sure no one had fallen asleep, which surprisingly happened quite often. To control the lights manually in the theaters, we had to go to the other side of the building. To speed things up, I usually did the checks in the dark, using only the flashlight on my phone for light. After checking all the theaters, there was one left. I walked in and turned on the flashlight on my phone once again. Usually, I would start at the front row and work my way back. I reached the last row, but before began searching, I suddenly stopped and stood completely still for a moment. I could hear breathing. At first, I thought it was coming from the vents, but the more I listened, the more I realized that it was definitely human breathing. I shoved my flashlight up and out towards the row of seats. I didn't see anybody but could feel my heart sink into my chest as clearly. Someone was definitely hiding from me. I wanted to call out to them, but I was too scared. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I stood there for a while, completely frozen, just listening, and then decided to plan off like I didn't hear anything. I walked back to the stairs, went up them and exited the theater. Right when I got out, I sprinted back to the main area. I found Noah at the concession stand and told him what I had just heard. Neither of us wanted to go back there, as we both decided to just wait by the front doors. We figured whoever it was would have to leave at some point. So when they did, we'd see them walking out the front door and then we'd finish closing up. We waited for a really long time, maybe around an hour. During that time, not a single person walked past to us and went out through the front doors. By this point, both of us just wanted to go home. We gathered enough courage to search each theater again. This time, we took the time to turn on the lights manually, one by one, as we went through the theaters. To our surprise, there was nobody there. Everything seemed completely normal. I thought maybe they had left through one of the emergency exits, as some moviegoers do that sometimes for different reasons. While checking the theaters, I also made sure to inspect all the exits, but none of them had been used. I could tell because there was about an inch of snow on the ground at that time, and there were no footprints leading away from any of the exits. Nobody started to doubt my story, but to be honest, I started doubting it myself. Noah managed to convince me that maybe I just imagined things or that the speakers were acting up for a short time. I accepted this explanation, and we closed everything up and went home. The next day arrived, and just like the night before, I was scheduled to work the closing shift with Noah. As part of our closing duties, we had to vacuum the hallways before we could leave. Usually, I tried to do this earlier in my shift, but on this night, I got too busy and couldn't do it until later. So, I started vacuuming, but it made strange noises and didn't pick up most of the spilled popcorn on the ground anymore. The vacuum we had was pretty cheap, so it didn't really surprise me that it wasn't working well. Luckily, we had a spare vacuum in one of the closets at the back that I knew I could use. I went to the front to get the keys and started walking towards the closet. As I was heading there, I realized that I had never been in most of these closets during my training. I didn't receive much information about them, except that there was a backup vacuum in one of them if I ever needed it. When I reached the door, I inserted the key to unlock it, but I was surprised to find that it was already unlocked. I opened the door and started feeling around the wall, trying to find a light switch, but then I stopped myself. A horrible, unbearable smell hit me like a big wave. I took a few steps back just to be able to breathe fresh air again. That's when I heard something moving from the back of the closet. I quickly closed and locked the door. In the next few minutes, I ran around the building searching for Noah. When I found him, I told him about the closet. His face changed immediately. "Hey, do you think this has something to do with what happened yesterday?" Until that moment, I had completely forgotten about yesterday. The idea that the two events could be connected didn't even cross my mind. "I think we should call the police," I said. Noah agreed, and we waited outside for them to arrive. When they came, I explained what had happened the previous night and now this night. We gave them the keys to the closet and told them how to get there. 10 minutes passed when all of a sudden at least 5 of their cop cars sped into the parking lot. One of them began questioning us, while the rest of them ran inside. At one point, he asked us for our manager's phone number. They ended up calling him, asking him to show up. Now, by this point, we still didn't even know the cops had found, and honestly, neither of us really wanted to know. But it wasn't long before we would find out. The cops came out of the front doors with a deranged-looking woman. From what I've been told, when the cops opened the closet door, they were immediately met by this woman holding a knife. She attacked the officers, but they managed to overpower her. They arrested her, and during the process, the police discovered 2 decaying dead bodies. A man and a woman were stuffed in the back corner of the closet. That's all the information we were given. Our manager arrived at that point and told us we could go home, which I was relieved to do. The very next day, I quit that job, and my manager understood my decision completely. Reflecting on the situation makes me feel really sick. As for Noah, I'm not sure what happened to him. I never spoke to him again after that night.